A shocking article has appeared on Putin's official news agency website, RIA Novosti. This article appeared on the 3rd of April 2022. It calls not only for the destruction of Ukraine as a country, but also the physical destruction of the people who live there. Not even Goebbels went this far in a public speech. This is the article. Что Россия должна сделать с Украиной? What should Russia do with Ukraine? RIA Novosti is part of Rossiya Segodnya, the official media group and mouthpiece of the Russian government. Therefore, anything from it is not to be treated as if it were from a private news organization, but as official policy. For example, if the Daily Mail in the United Kingdom calls for unemployment benefits to be halved, then that is the opinion of the writer and not of the government. RIA Novosti only parrots the opinion of the regime. As has been the case with dictatorial regimes such as Stalin's, Hitler's or today's Putin's, then this is the way that the dictator passes his will onto the people. Of course, Putin, no more than his forebears Stalin or Hitler, checked every article, but the system works in such a way as to ensure that it does reflect the official line and nothing other than the official line. I'm not going to read the whole article to you, but I'm providing links to the original article in Russian on the RIA Novosti website, and you can see at the same time as advocating genocide against Ukrainians, there are also advertisements for holiday homes in Turkey. There's also a link to a full translation in English for those of you who cannot read Russian. Therefore, there is no reason to believe me, at the end of the day, some bloke on the internet, or to accuse me of lying or spreading propaganda. This is from RIA Novosti directly. The author is one Timofey Sergeytsev, who, according to the RIA Novosti article, is a philosopher. In a different video, I have discussed the use of the word philosopher for Hitler's mentor Dietrich Eckart. Sergeytsev is a philosopher in the true sense of Dietrich Eckart, a hate-filled nationalist urging the elimination of those that do not come up to his racial standards. Sergeytsev is clearly not only a neo-Nazi, but also a believer in communism and communist imperialism. Try working that one out. You can see this not only in this article, but by looking at some of the other articles he's written on behalf of the current Russian government. Although a Nazi himself in the sense that Dietrich Eckart was, Sergeytsev is using the words Nazi to describe Ukraine as his boss Putin also does. Sergeytsev wants what he terms as being the denazification of Ukraine, and he says that this is, and now I quote directly from the article, necessary when a significant part of the people, most likely the majority, has been mastered and drawn into the Nazi policy in its politics. That is to say, when the hypothesis the people are good, the government is bad, does not work. Recognition of this fact is the basis of the policy of denazification of all its measures, and the fact itself is its subject matter. I believe in the opposite of Sergeytsev. That is to say, that most of the people in Russia are good, it's only the leadership which is bad. I urge that the bad people be removed from the Russian government. Sergeytsev appears to urge what he considers to be the bad people be removed from the planet. Therefore, the question one would ask is that if all or a significant part of the population of Ukraine are what Sergeytsev terms Nazis, then how do they intend to denazify? According to Sergeytsev, part of the proof that Ukrainians are Nazis is that they voted for Poroshenko and Zelensky. He therefore argues that denazification is a set of measures in relation to the Nazified population mass, which technically cannot be subject to direct punishment as war criminals. In other words, he's calling on Russian troops to murder Ukrainians and not have to fear the law. He writes, and once more I quote directly, "The Nazis who took up arms should be destroyed to the maximum on the battlefield. There should be no significant differences between the armed forces of Ukraine and the so-called national battalions, as well as the territorial defense that joined these two types of military formations. All of them are equally involved in extreme cruelty against the civilian population, equally guilty of the genocide of the Russian people, do not comply with the laws and customs of war. War criminals and active Nazis should be exemplarily and exponentially punished. There must be total lustration. Any organizations that have associated themselves with the practice of Nazism should be liquidated and banned. However, in addition to the above mentioned, a significant part of the masses which are passive Nazis, accomplices of Nazism, are also guilty. They supported and indulged the Nazi government. The just punishment of this part of the population is possible." Now, this reminds me of the speech of Himmler in Poznan in October 1943, when talking about the necessity of murdering Jewish children who were somehow guilty, in his perverted mind, of the alleged crimes of their parents. Sir Gateshead wants to eliminate all Ukrainians, or at least a significant part of the population of Ukraine, whereas Himmler himself wants to murder all Jews. Sir Gateshead also wants to destroy the Ukrainian state, the country. Now, once more, I quote, "Denazification can only be carried out by the winner, which implies 1, his absolute control over the denazification process, and 2, the power to ensure such control. In this respect, a denazified country cannot be sovereign. The denazifying state, Russia, cannot proceed from a liberal approach with regard to denazification. The ideology of the denazifier cannot be disputed by the guilty party subject to denazification." So, in other words, he doesn't think that people have the right to say, "No, I'm not a Nazi." So, does he want to kill every single Ukrainian, all 44 million people? Well, his explanation is the duration of denazification can in no way be less than 1 generation, which must be born, grow up and reach maturity under the conditions of denazification. The Nazification of Ukraine continued for more than 30 years, beginning at least in 1989, when Ukrainian nationalism received legal and legitimate forms of political expression and led the movement for independence towards Nazism. So therefore, if I've understood this correctly, and it is a little bit difficult to understand, anybody born or who grew up between 1989 and the present time is somebody who needs to be denazified, which appears to mean killed. Anyway, so he does, of course, have an explanation for the lack of Nazism somehow being proof of Nazism, in the same way that the conspiracy theorist finds the lack of proof for their theory just going to prove the theory because it was well hidden. Once more, I quote, "The peculiarity of modern Nazified Ukraine is that it disguised Nazism as a desire for independence and a European, Western, pro-American path of development. To assert that in Ukraine there's no Nazism, only localized individual excesses. After all, there's no Nazi party, no Führer, and no racial laws. So the fact that there's no Nazi party, no Führer, and no racial laws just goes to prove that they are Nazis." I'm not making this up. It's all written. If you can read Russian, I urge you to actually read it. However, he does know where this non-existent Nazism comes from. It comes from the collective West. The Western countries are the designers, the source, and the sponsor of Ukrainian Nazism, while the Western Bandera cadres and their historical memory are only the tools for the Nazification of Ukraine. So, Ukrainian Nazism, Ukro-Nazism, use his word, carries not less but a greater threat to the world and Russia than German Nazism of the Hitlerite version. Note that he put the word Russia outside that of the world, so as though Russia's sort of an independent sort of planet or something. The name Ukraine apparently cannot be retained as the title of any fully denazified state. He writes, "There shall be no Marshall Plan. The cadres and organizations that are the instrument of denazification and newly denazified republics cannot but rely on Russia's direct military and organizational support." What does that mean? I suppose that means that those that survive can be left to starve, just as they did in the 1930s. He writes also, denazification will inevitably also be de-Ukrainization. Well, at least he admits it. It must be deprived of political functionality. Unlike Georgia or the Baltic countries, Ukraine has never existed as a state, and automatically Ukraine will lead to Nazism. So it's an artificial anti-Russian construction in his opinion. So the people who lead this country must be eliminated. It's impossible to re-educate them. Or so he writes. However, he appears to accept that not everyone in Ukraine needs to be killed, thus opening up a potential path for collaborators. Those who do not support the Nazi regime, suffer from it, and the war unleashed by it in the Donbass must be consolidated and organized and become the pillar of a new government. So what is the point of what they're doing now? Denazification as the goal of the special military operation within the framework of this operation is understood as the military victory over the Kiev regime, the liberation of the territories from armed supporters of the Nazis, the elimination of the Nazis, the capture of criminals, and the creation of systemic conditions for the subsequent denazification in peacetime. As I've already said, the word denazification appears to mean genocide of Ukrainians. So first of all, they have to defeat the Ukrainian government and then to go on, before going on to kill everybody. However, there is one positive thing in what he says here, is that not all of the country need to be occupied. Western Ukraine is unlikely to become part of the pro-Russian territories, that's to say annexed by Russia, because it'll be so hostile to Russia, but it will have to be forcibly neutral and demilitarized and have all forms of Nazism banned in that country. And that'd be a good place to dump all of those people who hate Russia. It does, however, accept it needs to be militarily occupied, and this will probably require a permanent Russian military presence. He does, however, think that all of the rest of Ukraine will be annexed to Russia. Sir Gateshead notes that Russia will have no allies in the denazification of Ukraine. To put the planned denazification of Ukraine into practice, Russia will have to finally part with pro-European and pro-Western illusions. Now, I must remind you once again that this is the official policy of the new the neo-Nazi regime in Moscow. This is what they want to do. Given that when Sir Gateshead says Nazi, he really means Ukraine, and that, as he's even admitted, that denazification is de-Ukrainianization, there's a new word for you, it is utterly clear that the people in Ukraine have no choice than to fight, because it's no longer a case of giving up and sort of being part of Russia, which you might think, oh, well, it doesn't matter so much there. Well, at least the Russians have to build new roads and all the rest of it, and maybe won't be able to vote, but at least we'll have shops and things open. That is not the policy. This is clearly something far worse. This is absolutely a par to what Hitler was trying to do in Ukraine. So what I think will happen now, this war will now start to become more brutal, not because just of this article, of course. I mean, how many people actually saw this article? Although it was on the RIA Novosti website and has now been given quite a lot of coverage, although maybe not so much in the English language, which is the reason I am doing it now. As people in Ukraine have seen the murders and atrocities committed by Putin's neo-Nazi army of imperialist conquest, fewer Ukrainian soldiers will now be willing to show mercy to enemy soldiers, which in turn could lead to them being mistreated and thus them fighting harder. This, of course, could have been the entire object of writing articles like this, is to make sure that Russian soldiers themselves realize that they cannot surrender. Of course, I do not believe long term that Putin can have success. He's just digging his own hole deeper and deeper. But the problem is this: he's going to take more and more people with him, a significant number of whom are Russians. Now, so for the record, here is the photograph of Sergeytsev. It's on the RIA Novosti website and it's next to one of his articles. And right next to his photograph is an advertisement for anybody requiring fast-track EU citizenship, which is a pretty good idea for anybody living in Russia right now. Let's face it, thousands of Russians have left because of the fascist regime in Moscow at the moment. So what about Sergeytsev personally? Will he ever get punished? After all, he's urging Russian soldiers to murder Ukrainians. Well, the forecast isn't good. If the Nuremberg trials are anything to go by, the propagandists who urged on Nazi murderers in the 1940s all got off scot-free. My request to you and to anyone else is to remember the name of propagandist criminals like Sergeytsev once the Putin regime has fallen. I don't know for what crime he can actually be charged, but I hope he's charged, or he will be charged with something. Thanks for listening.